Welcome to Zero Gravity's podcast. Today I have my good friend, David. He is the co-founder of Lit Protocol. Before we get too deep into Lit, could you give people a 1 to 2 minute introduction into what is Lit Protocol and how did you get to work in there?
Yeah, awesome. Super delighted to be here, Jax. Thanks for the opportunity. So what we built at Lit Protocol over the past 4 years is a distributed programmable key management network. So if you think about digital ownership, like anybody who's listening to this obviously has a conception of a smart contract blockchain and Vitalik's big insight, which is with smart contracts, you can have decentralized programs that operate over state, over the ledger, without having to set up your own chain. We have followed a similar track at Lit Protocol, but with the other side of digital ownership, which is signing and key management. So functionally, it is a distributed system to manage keys where developers can write programs that dictate, where the logic dictates how those keys are signing and encrypting.
And then talk to us a little bit about like how you guys came to this idea. Like what was some things that you thought about in the founding? Was it you're like, there's too much difficulty in key management in the cryptosphere?
Key management is a generational problem in computer science. And this idea of doing key management as a distributed network is something that's been around for some time. We took the idea really, really seriously. How we kind of got to this idea initially is, for a little bit of background, my first company was acquired by LinkedIn in 2017. And then after that, starting in 2018, I teamed up with my current co-founder, Chris Casano, and we spent 3.5 years trying to find a really impactful infrastructure-oriented product to work on. We navigated the idea maze for a long period of time. And then at the end of 2020, we had built an NFT marketplace. It had some traction, but OpenSea and some of the other players were very dominant at that point. And we thought to ourselves, well, NFTs are interesting and cool, but how could they evolve? How could they be more powerful, more useful? And we formulated this hypothesis where, what if you could make an NFT unlockable, where if you owned it, you could access some other content, some other benefit? Like, that's pretty cool. What would it take to make an unlockable NFT that's aligned with, let's call them Web3 design principles? And fundamentally, the question came down to, well, where does the key material live for doing this unlocking ability? And then in February of 2021, we said, well, what if we use a network of nodes to manage key material? And that was just the light bulb moment. It was like, oh, this is much bigger than unlockable NFTs, which are quite cool. This is kind of the type of idea that we've been searching for. And then since then, we've raised $15 million. It's a 20-person team. The network today manages north of $100 million in assets, and across a variety of use cases that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big use cases that we focus a lot, because Zero Gravity is very focused on decentralized AI, building AI on chain, is you guys have been very focused on agents recently. So being a key management company, most people might think like key management and agents, like what does that have to do with one another? So talk to us a little bit about like how you got interested in this kind of agentic future and then like where Lit kind of fits in.
Yeah, absolutely. So largely since the release of GPT-3, we've been like, that was kind of the start of what people have called phase one or wave one of agents, where you ask an agent a question and its response is to give you some information. Now, we're right now at the early part of 2025 in the transition to the second wave of these applied AI applications, which is agents doing things on behalf of people. And so in order to do that, in every system, just to kind of add a little bit of color here, in every system, whether it's a blockchain, whether it's a bank account, the stock exchange, e-commerce, a human's or an organization's, like some user, their identity and authority is always represented through a secret, the private key, credit card number, API key, password. So it's just a very natural fit by seeing the emerging capacity of LLMs, of AIs, and recognizing that the only thing that is stopping these types of machine intelligence from doing work on behalf of people and organizations is being able to manage the identity or the secrets of those users and organizations in a way that is secure. So it was a very, very natural fit. Long been interested in AI and artificial intelligence. My co-founder, Chris, was very early in the AI art gen, well before DALL-E, like a decade ago, in the early kind of style GAN networks. So it's definitely something that has been in our sphere of awareness, and then just the advancements made with LLMs kind of triggered that, okay, now is the time to continue to build tooling around this such that we can get to a different type of internet, a real upgrade. And I'm sure we could talk about, where the web is going and what kind of agents mean for the web. But I think it was always in the back of our mind that this type of technology would be really impactful for machine intelligence, right? Because it kind of come down to this fundamental question of where do you store the key pair for an AI agent? And functionally, we've built like a pretty robust system to meet that demand.
Yeah, so let's talk about like where you see the future of agents going, and then I want to talk more about like where lit kind of fits into that stack. So like, do you feel like I personally feel like I'll be heading home and I would just tell my like agent to be like, order me a steak with potatoes like above this kind of rating, and then maybe eventually like it just knows all my preferences and it orders it like kind of, it just intuits exactly what I want. Like, do we feel like we're going to have essentially like personalized employees, or like what do we think is like the future of the agentic economy?
Yeah, I think that that's right. One way to think about it is like right now, everybody is used to the notion of apps. Like we've been in the app paradigm for, you know, more than a decade now. And you can almost think about like, what is a human or an organization doing? They are just jumping from app to app, from service to service to get the things that they need done accomplished, whether it's ordering a steak, running payroll, whatever it might be. And so rather than a human mind kind of doing that coordination across all of these services, we just put an agent in there and the person or the organization moves back one layer. So like right now we all use the iPhone as the way, or some cell phone, the way to access this ecosystem of apps that we all use to have a more convenient and better life, hopefully. And the way that I see it happening is just like the organization or the human steps back one level. They interact with essentially a home agent or an assistant that in turn interacts with the swarm of services that are agentic and not, that comprise like the new intelligent internet. And I'd say like that's where things appear to be heading. And then we can start to build on top of that and speculate even further around what are some of the benefits of building that system on decentralized, cryptographically enabled rails versus captured fiat commercial rails.
Yeah, I would love to talk about, some of the like use cases and things you actually see like people doing, like maybe the idea of Siri, like actually having a truly personalized assistant, and maybe that assistant would go out and talk with the, food ordering assistant. Like, what do you think like the future of these agents is? Is it them working in like swarms or coordination, and like we'll have just very highly tailored assistants, like you would have like a financial manager, or you would have, a legal expert. You would have agents for each one of these. Like for me, the most simple paradigm is like creating a company where you're like, I have the marketing agent, I have this person. Like, how do you think it kind of shakes out, or do you feel like we'll have just more general purpose agents?
I think like borrowing from the app paradigm is a pretty clear way to think about it, which
Yeah.
is to say, you have Uber and you have DoorDash and you have Gusto for payroll and all of these type of things. and then those become specialized agents. And if you have your home agent, your core assistant, it is in turn acting with these services. So the person, the end user, they are using a swarm of agents, but they don't necessarily have to go have a relationship and a username and a login screen with all of these parties. They're doing it all just through their kind of their home agent, their assistant, for lack of a better term. And some of the language around this is still developing. Um, so yeah, that could be wrong. Like it could be that people just are still like, I use this app for this thing, which happens to be an agent, and I use another app for another thing that happens to be an agent. But in terms of kind of getting the 10x better experience of what it's like to use the web, a fully realized Siri, the movie Her, those are nice kind of examples of the world that we could get to. And it's really interesting from people who like have been app builders. The kind of the insight there is that like apps in their traditional sense, we're at the tail end potentially of that, which has been just a major both economic and value creation and value capture space for entrepreneurs and software developers for many, many years. And that appears to be changing.
Yeah, I really like how you mentioned the app paradigm and how that might potentially fit into the agentic paradigm. So let's talk a little bit about where Lit fits in here. Is it like, hey, Jax has a social security number, he's going to have a credit card. Not only that, his agent's probably going to have some kind of API key to some kind of model or RAG. Like, talk to us about where, for the end user, like where do they see Lit fitting in here, and like what do they need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, we build developer tools. So people may interact with things that are Lit branded, but may not. And so, kind of continuing with this kind of framework of the home assistant, it's pretty likely that ChatGPT and OpenAI, they're going to go for this opportunity. Apple is going for this opportunity with Apple Intelligence. Google will go for this opportunity. These are kind of the big established players, the incumbents, that all will have systems that are largely locked down in some way. Like there's a whole process, for example, to listing an app on the Apple App Store where it needs to be approved. It's not open. The opportunity is to have a similar type of system, but that runs on open rails, where individuals get to decide and have more authority around the types of agent applications they interact with. Not too dissimilar how anybody can launch a smart contract and anybody can interact with that smart contract. And an individual needs to decide, do I want to use this smart contract or another one? It's more open and less curated or closed. And certainly there's advantages and disadvantages to both of them, but the bias is towards setting this up as an open system creates the possibility for more innovation, essentially, and better products and like better lifestyle for people who are using this. And then where the role of Lit protocol comes back to this notion of, if you're going to have an AI that does something on somebody's behalf, where do you store the secrets? Where do you store the credit card numbers? Where do you store the private keys? Where do you store the API keys? And so let's say you want to have an agent that can rebalance between your stock portfolio, your crypto portfolio, and also buy dinner and through e-commerce. Being able to have a single place that is your home assistant that is both aware of those secrets, can find services to go do that, like let's say portfolio rebalancing, e-commerce purchases for your friends' birthdays, but not expose your underlying private key, your API keys, your credit cards to the swarm to keep the user protected. We really see that as our core role. And what we have built out is something that we call the Lit Agent Wallet, which it's pretty similar, frankly, to like if you've ever done an OAuth connection where you sign in with Google or sign in with Twitter, and you see the screen where it says, this app wants access to your contacts and calendar. This app can post on Twitter on your behalf. It's basically that kind of like same exact worldview, except rather than access to data or posting on your behalf, it's things like, this app can spend up to $100 a day without contacting you. This app can interact with these contracts. This agent can interact with these websites. So as it relates to like a user experience, the flow doesn't change too much. Folks are like globally quite familiar with this notion of a consent screen. But the difference is moving from a relationship on the like on a per app basis, which is where we're at now, to the person has a relationship with the agent. They set some rules like, what is my global spending limit? I can spend $1,000 a day, and then the agent can then go connect to all of the apps and services. And so the consent is managed at like the home agent or assistant level rather than a per app basis, which to me seems like a fundamental keystone to enabling that her like world where the agent goes, yeah, I've just gone and done this for you. I've just completed this action. You're welcome. And you go, oh, thanks, agent. That's great. That's exactly what I wanted. And it obviously takes some time for that to all shake out. But one other thing that I'm really excited about in the context of this is just recognizing that agents and applied AI developers, the complexity and the sophistication of like, what is the difference between an Ethereum smart contract and a Solana smart contract, and interacting with the Charles Schwab API to buy stocks. The type of abstraction that we have been building with the Lit Agent wallet kind of makes those all the same, rather than requiring a developer to get down into the nitty gritty details around understanding the differences between these systems. And that's been a classic story, both at Web 2 and Web 3, of kind of moving up the abstraction ladder, making it easier and easier and easier to build applications of higher levels of sophistication.
And then talk to us a little bit, like, so we've gone where like kind of the end user might see Lit, and of course this is developer tooling. So let's talk from the developer's perspective. Let's say they're going to be building with like Eliza, or maybe like you guys have a virtuals plugin in the future. Maybe you already have one. So talk to them a little bit about like where it comes in the life cycle. Where would they start thinking about like, you know what, I need an agentic wallet. I need to integrate Lit.
Yeah, I would say as soon as you want to start doing anything financial on behalf of the user. And so this could apply to an individual who has an agent, and where do you store the private keys for that agent? And it could also apply to, like in the context of virtuals, an agent that is owned by a DAO, functionally owned by a collective or an organization. And so, that's the nature of private keys, right? If you have the key, the funds are yours and you're trusted, which is the whole idea of using this sophisticated distributed key management system to validate policies and craft the transaction, rather than giving the LLM, giving the agent the private key.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit about like the DAO context. So when we were talking with Matt from Gaia, he was talking about how back in the day, his company, they used to run a lot of hackathons. I think it was the previous company it was at. And he's like, nowadays, like you can have most agents run different hackathons, like in terms of, talked about like DAO operations. So where do you see this all going? Like, do you see us having like fully decentralized hackathons, fully decentralized DAOs that actually do like treasury management and all of these kinds of things? Let's say, your DAO treasury is stuck in ETH, and that's practically a stable coin at this point. And you're like, hey, I would like to get some more yield. Sorry for the ETH maxies out there. Had to toss a little jab in there. Talk to us a little bit about like where you see these agents going in a crypto sense. Is it they'll be balancing your DeFi portfolio, or where do you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything like what's I think cool about the view that we're taking and some of the design constraints that we're taking is that like whether the end user is a DAO or an individual it's kind of the same. In the same way that like from the perspective of Uniswap is not doesn't matter if you've signed the transaction with a safe that represents $100 million in treasury assets, or you're one person with $5 in your MetaMask account. So like, at least from the angle that we're designing and building from, there's really not a difference between those two things. But yeah, in terms of like the types of things that are really exciting are kind of the things that are just more boring, basically. Like the internet cinematic universe of Eliza is really wonderful. It's really exciting. But in terms of like materially the value that it is contributing to individuals' lives who are using these services, I think those are just classic software things, which is things that used to require a human in the loop to either pay attention to things, to click buttons, like optimizing your yield, for example. There's a number of really great teams that are working on yield optimization agents. Is way more boring in a sense than like a Twitter personality, but like deeply valuable because it's giving somebody something that they used to be doing manually. Now they get the time back in their life, but they still get the benefit of generating the highest amount of APY on the tokens that they hold.
Yeah, it's one thing because we go so deep on AI topics. Some people are like, I'm excited and scared at the exact same time. Where you're like, we've got AI agents being like the biggest yappers on Twitter. We've got like, in theory, I think I'd heard this concept before. It's like the dead web, where like essentially agents and AI are just producing all of the content. Where do you think do you think most humans like will just be like chilling, and what do you think will end up happening if we can build these like hyper sophisticated agents that can do financial management, can do legal documents?
Yeah, I mean, what it means, it's a good question. There's definitely a lot of unknowns that are floating out there in terms of what a fully realized agent web looks like. I mean, for me, I think like uh, the thing that I'm most scared of is less about the runaway agent and more around like what does that future world look like if our trust is in just these kind of mega corporations that are out there. And we've seen that example that happened with Facebook. You know, there was plenty of things, and like whether it was Facebook that was motivated or was it the federal government putting pressure on Facebook, like some of those details are still unknown. But it's certainly true that a lot of public perception and kind of like the rift that people perceive in society is from this idea of let's put the thing on the page that is going to maximize the amount of attention that a social media user will look at in their feed. And as a result, it seems like, you know, there's this general perception that things are more divided than ever. And for me, that's the real fear around having this whole agent verse be something that is kind of captured and closed source. There's obviously like a bunch of encouraging things that are happening. DeepSeek, Grok 3 that was just released today as open source that are pushing things more in the open source direction. But as people talk about like what is the fear of this whole emerging agent web, there's a lot of talk about alignment and what is the ethics of the agent itself. And I think like the most important, least talked about part of this is actually about the data and who's controlling the generator prompt associated with these agents. And so I'm definitely excited about, and it feels like there's a sense of urgency towards getting the infrastructure foundations such that we can have user-owned AI, where there is an alternative to this captured agent web. And that's where a lot of our work is focused.
Yeah, and you made me think of two additional things. As I was talking with the Near team the other day, and I was like, I don't know if anyone's thinking about, we talk a lot about back in the day in the web about SQL injection, but it's like, oh, what about like prompt injection?
Right.
There's also, there's many interesting things that come up. Also, like, there could be nefarious agents. Like, you can't, what do you throw an agent in jail, like shut off their AWS server? Do you just have like a credit score for agents like that? This one's kind of naughty sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And it's also like, who's the victim of that quote naughty agent, right? And then that in turn will kind of, dictate how these things are at least like how the market perceives them, and then maybe in the future how they're regulated. I guess just to kind of like jump from the doom and gloom story.
Yeah, it's positive.
No, it's an important part of the conversation, but just to kind of like balance it out with the other side is like one of the benefits I think of building these the agent web on open systems and like developers and builders recognizing their responsibility in the emerging technological infrastructure of the planet with the rise of machine intelligence is there's some pretty like crazy benefits that are still just on the periphery of being able to even be explored in building these open systems. For example, if you think about, like, again, from the data perspective, right now, if you use ChatGPT, you trust OpenAI to manage all of the context associated with your agent, which is what people typically refer to as the agent's memory. Now, there's some really great work with that we've been doing with the team at Recall, which is the new merger of Tableland and Ceramic, around building decentralized memory that is encrypted with lit, such that that context, the past conversations that you've been having with the agent, what it knows about you, is user owned. And I think one of the things that potentially gets bootstrapped out of that, and this is where the frontier is there's some pretty sci-fi like products that could emerge in the coming years. Things like true collective intelligence, where we have agents that aren't really owned by anybody, but anybody can upgrade them by contributing data to them. And that type of thing is only possible on decentralized rails. So in many ways, like, there's still this ideological conversation around, do these things emerge as closed systems versus open systems? And then even in the context of open systems, there's like, is it on a per app basis, or does each person have their own core assistant agent that then interacts with the swarm? Like, some of these things are still shaking out. We obviously have an opinionated take there. But in the kind of the broader conversation around, is the agent web going to be driven by crypto, or is it going to be driven by OpenAI and Apple? I don't think we will get to these type of like collective intelligence, sci-fi type products in the closed route. So just like adding more weight to the benefit of doing this in the open way.
Well, it's also the verifiability. So being like, okay, now we can actually debug. Like, if OpenAI makes a mistake, it's like, who's to really debug that? At least from the public perspective, pretty much no one could that I would know of. And yeah, obviously on this podcast, we're very bullish on the crypto way. Now, you guys have worked with so many companies, and one thing that I really love about you guys is you haven't just worked with crypto companies. You kind of span the gamut. I really like what you said about like Recall and having this like decentralized identity. I think that's really interesting. We just talked to the team at Mira, and they do like anti-hallucination. What are some of the like really exciting things you see like that we need in order to push forward this agentic future? It's like obviously decentralized rails, decentralized memory, anti-hallucination tooling.
Yep. Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm really excited about that we've got in our really near-term roadmap is running a headless browser inside of the Lit protocol network. Once we get that up and fully tested, that will be a pretty big moment of just the unification of all financial transactions, whether it's crypto, whether it's with TradFi instruments like stocks, or doing e-commerce purchases with credit cards. Like, that's where it starts to come together. In this industry, we've been talking for more than a decade around, eventually crypto is going to kind of cross the chasm and not be its own little economic and niche. And I think agents are the best possible bet for that to happen. And so that's definitely the thing that I'm looking forward to is, being able to do traditional e-commerce with credit card numbers on crypto rails. All of the components are there. It's just a matter of wiring them together. There's a number of vendors out there who will accept crypto to generate debit cards in real time. And so somebody can live their entire life in crypto, but still interact with every possible service that is available, every good that they could buy. We talked just right before we started around like tracking the price of the agent coin. Is it up? Is it down? And, there's something that we've seen in crypto over and over, which is all of a sudden, because everything is liquid, there's like crazy enthusiasm. And then people go, yeah, but where's the products? And, it does take 6, 8, 12, 18 months for some of the infrastructure and the products to catch up. But we've seen it time and time again. It happened with smart accounts. It happened with decentralized finance. And so, yeah, we're just in a really kind of interesting period right now as it relates to that unfolding with agents.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about your guys' upcoming milestones. But before we get into that, what kind of advice do you have for? We have a lot of builders and developers that listen to this podcast. So, what I would love to know: do you feel like there's an underutilized area of Lit protocol where you're like, you know what? I'm surprised not more people are building this feature.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Lip Protocols is a very generalized system around being able to program signing and encryption. And then what we've built with the Lit Agent wallet is this kind of more specific consent take. Um, I would say that like the set of people that are talking about agents is way bigger than the people who are actually applying themselves and building. So, yeah, I would say like Lit Protocol is just a tool at the end of the day, in the same way that Ethereum is just a tool at the end of the day. It's a very capable, powerful network, but it really matters like what's the idea and what do you do with it. So I would say like it's interesting to consider, oh, you could use Lit for claimable wallets and create a PayPal like go to market for your agent. But you still need the fundamental product idea. And there's just really never been a better time to experiment.
All right, well, builders build, and talk to us a little bit about some of the upcoming milestones. Like, what can people look forward to for the next like month, 3 months down the line?
Yeah, amazing. So we're about a week out of ETH Denver as we're recording this. We are going to release a bunch of components as it relates to the agent auth, uh, which will just like make implementing agents a heck of a lot easier in terms of um, provisioning users agent wallets, letting users control their on-chain policies around what the agent can transact on. The other big milestone that we have coming up in April, we'll have our V1 network launch, and the token will be live at that point. So the TGE is coming, and so there's obviously a lot to get ready there in terms of the staking portal and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I would say more agent tooling and the launch of the V1 network, which includes the token, are the two main milestones.
Well, that's very exciting. And finally, where can people learn more about you, like get involved with you and learn more about Lit?
Yeah, definitely. So litprotocol.com is a great place to start. There's a Discord, there's a Telegram. We have like an extremely sharp partner success and DevRel team. Love hopping on calls with people. This it's not necessarily easy to build a world class product, but we've seen it happen before. Using some of the rails that we provide, like Genius Terminal is this amazing trading project and bridge product. Emblem Vault recently migrated their whole backend infrastructure over to Lit for cross-chain intelligent vaults. And so uh, we're around, and we love this stuff.
Absolutely. Well, if anyone's interested in building with Lit, obviously reach out to the team, reach out with David. David, what's your handle on Twitter? Obviously, we'll put it into the description, but shout out where people can follow you to.
Yeah, just at David L. Sneider and at Lit Protocol. We're super reachable.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, let's continue building the future of on-chain and AI agents.